Hi everyone, Crista Cowan here with another episode of The Barefoot Genealogist. Today we continue our series of presentations about death records. Today we're going to talk about finding clues in death records. So if you missed the first couple of presentations, you might want to go back and watch those. In the first one we talked about death certificates specifically and where to find them. And then in the next presentation, we talked about alternatives to death certificates, other types of records that will provide death information. Today, we're actually going to take a closer look at those death certificates and make sure that we're mining all of the clues out of those records. A lot of times we find an index entry and we think, oh, we have the death date and place, and that's enough information. But there's so much more information on a death certificate. So we're just going to look at what some of that information is and what we're going to do next with that information. And then I'll walk you through actually one of my specific things on my family tree and show you exactly how I would go about finding that death certificate and what I would do with the information on there. Hope that's helpful. Let's dive in. So the first thing I just want to highlight is all of the information that is available on a death certificate. Not only do you have the name of the person and when and where they died, oftentimes you have information about the cause of death, attributing causes to the cause of death, so other things that led up to it, how long they were attended to by a physician, if there was an autopsy performed or not. Sometimes it'll also include details about the person's marital status, their spouse's name, their occupation. Parents' names, sometimes you get really lucky and there's also parents' birthplace information included. There's also information frequently about where the body was removed to, if they were buried or cremated, what cemetery their body was removed to, sometimes even information about who the director of the funeral home was or who the funeral home was that took care of the burial, their usual residence, how long they've lived in that place, all of this information on a single death certificate. And so when we say go after that original, don't just stop with the index, it's because there's so much information available. Not only that, one of the things that we've talked about is if you're looking for the names of the parents of one of your ancestors and their death certificate does not provide this information, check the death certificates of their siblings as well, because maybe one of those siblings' deaths was recorded at a time and in a place where the person recording the information and the person providing the information, the informant, had that information available to them. So lots of really rich details. We're going to look at a few copies. I know some of you are brand new to genealogy, and we're so thrilled that you're joining our ranks. Some of you may not have actually ever seen a copy of a death certificate. So I'm going to actually walk through a few of those just so that you get a feel for how that works. So every form is slightly different. It depends on the time period. It depends on the state. Now, we talked last week about how most states in the United States did not actually keep death certificates formally required until the early 1900s. So since then, there have been a few changes to some of those forms. Prior to that, if a record was kept, it would have been kept usually at a county or a town level, and those forms are going to even look more different. So just getting familiar with what you're looking at is really important. Now, if you're not looking at this full screen, I encourage you, if you just hover over the center of your screen, if you're watching this in live stream, you should be able to make your screen a full screen instead of just watching it in the little video viewer window. If you're watching an archived version of this on YouTube, your full screen button is going to be down on the right-hand side just underneath the video. Hopefully that'll help you see what I'm looking at. And hopefully you can also see my little highlighter here. So I'm looking at this record, and actually the name of the person this certificate is for is on line 3. So it doesn't even show up at the top of the record. You have to kind of look for it. So here it is on line 3. Her name's Elnora Johnson. Her date of death is February 1st, even though they typed an I there, February 1st, 1952. She's a female, she's white, she's widowed, and then there's a little number 2 that's been handwritten in here. So that might be a clue that possibly she's been widowed for a couple of years. Certainly it's something worth looking into. Next, it lists her date of birth, which is March 1st, 1877, and she's 75 years of age. I always double check that math just to make sure that the information is consistent. And if it's not, then I try to figure out why it's not or what might cause it to be inconsistent. Then here it lists her occupation, her usual occupation, which in this case is housekeeper. Her birthplace is listed as Missouri in the United States. Now there's an O written here. I don't know if that's an O or a 0. Again, that could be a clue to more information. Was she born in Ozark County, possibly? Who knows? But is that a clue? It's certainly worth investigating. Now, I'm going to jump right back up to the top of this document here, and you're going to notice that actually fields number 1 and 2 are residence or location information. Field number 1 is where she died. She died in Sparta, Missouri, which is in Christian County. She had been there for 50 years. And so that's not just the residence, which also was Sparta, but the length of stay or how long she had lived there. So if she's lived there for 50 years and she was 75 years old when she died, she moved there when she was about 25 years old. Again, a clue to where you might start searching for information. If you're digging into census records, you know that for the last 50 years she's been in this county. If you want to figure out where she was before she was 25, maybe this clue to an O here, maybe it's Ozark County that you need to look at. Maybe she got married at that time. Maybe she was married around the time she was 25. All of those, just little pieces of information that you rack up and record so that you can follow the clues. So that top section on this certificate is place of death and usual residence. Now we're going to come back down here to line 13. It lists her father as WM, which is a typical abbreviation for William Abbott. And her mother's name in this case is listed as not known. That's not her mother's name. That just means that I say that sort of tongue-in-cheek. It just means that the informant did not know the name of her mother. So just make sure that you recognize that for what it is. She was never in the armed services or the armed forces. And then here it lists the informant. In this case, the informant is Roger Johnson, also of Sparta. Now, her last name is Johnson. Her married name is Johnson. So is Roger one of her children? It's something I'd want to double check and see. If he is, now I know where Roger was living in 1952. So just additional clues about the structure of the family, where people are at, what's going on. Now, this center section here is all about her cause of death. She died of a myocardial infarction and hypostatic, wow, I'm not a medical person, hypostatic something, I'd have to blow that up, due to vascular hypertension, due to arteriosclerosis. So if I'm trying to put together a family medical history in particular, this cause of death becomes really important to me, because as I want to track that back through the generations to see if there is family history of certain things that repeat over and over again, I'd want to pay attention to that. Now there's this tiny little box over here checked that says that no autopsy was performed. If an autopsy was performed, there might be further information available through the hospital or through the county where I could see if there was a further file or further records available. Now down here, it has the physician's information. So he says he's attended the deceased from January 29th to February 1st, so but this is January 29th of 1951. So he's attended her for almost a year for her illness. And then it has his name, Dr. Warren W. Wilson of Sparta, Missouri, and when he signed it. Now down below here we list the burial information. She was buried on February 3rd, so 2 days after she died, buried on February 3rd in the Fairview Cemetery in Christian County. And then hopefully you can see this here. This is the registrar's information about when the death was recorded. And then this final little field over here, not to be forgotten, it lists T.B. Chafin of Ozark, Missouri as the funeral director. So again, if you wanted more information, you might be able to contact the cemetery or the funeral home to get further information if it's available. So make sure that when you look at these, you're not just saying, oh, Eleanor Johnson died on February 1st, 1952 in Sparta, Missouri, and be done with it. Recognize that there's a lot of information available here if you just make sure you read every single field. Now, not to belabor the point, but let me just show you a different kind of form. So this previous form, this one was 1952 from the state of Missouri. Now we're going to jump backwards 40 years. This is a 1912 certificate, also from the state of Missouri. And I just wanted to show you this so that you see that those forms change over time. This one looks a little bit different. Again, the place of death information is right prominent up here at the top. In this case, it's Trenton in Grundy County, Missouri. Here's the actual address where the death occurred. And then there's her name, Mary Delzana Allen, a white female who is married. So that says to me that her husband is still living. She's not listed as widowed. She was born March 13th, 1871. You'll notice there's no place of birth listed in this case. It doesn't appear to be a field even for that. Her usual occupation is housewife. Oh, here we go. Here's her birthplace. So it's actually listed several fields down from the birth date. It lists Memphis, Missouri as her birthplace. So just because it's not right there where you would expect it to be, don't let it go unnoticed. Then we have information about her parents. And I love this because not only does it give us her father's name, Henry H. Saling, which then gives us her maiden name, it also gives us his birthplace, also Memphis, Missouri. And then it gives her mother's maiden name, Gold Mine, Mary L. Hammond, born in Kentucky. So this parental information, when it occurs and when it's been completed, is just a treasure of information. Now, her death information is going to be over here on the right-hand side. She died August 19th, 1912. It looks like she was sick from the 11th to the 19th. And I think this says organic heart trouble. And then here is the name of the attending physician and where he practices in Trenton. She was buried in the Maple Grove Cemetery on the 23rd of August. So again, 3 or 4, looks like 4 days after she died. And then here is the name at the bottom here of the undertaker and the business or the funeral home that he works for. Again, so that you have that additional information if you want to go searching for more records or possible files, maybe a copy of an obituary, who purchased the cemetery plot, all of those kinds of things that can be found either through a funeral home or through a cemetery. And then this little piece of information, which you should always pay attention to, which is the informant. In this case, it's S.W. Allen of Trenton, Missouri. I happen to know that S.W. Allen, S.W. are the initials of her husband, so this is her husband who was the informant. That puts things into perspective. If it's the youngest child who gives this information, as it was in the previous case, and he did not know the name of his grandmother, well, that says to me that he probably didn't know her. So then I have an idea of maybe when or by when his grandmother had passed away. In this case, not only does her husband list her parents' names, he lists her mother's maiden name, their middle initials, her father's exact birthplace. My guess is he had just always been told that she and her father were born in the same place. So again, take that with a grain of salt, recognizing in the same place could have meant the exact same place, or it could have just meant the same state, as opposed to her mother who was born in a different state. So always pay attention to who that informant is and see if you can't figure out what the relationship is of that informant to the person, and then look at this information in the light of that, right? Her husband was not present when she was born. So this information then becomes a little bit of hearsay. Her husband may or may not have actually known her parents, right? So you look at it in the light of the information being provided and who is providing that information to determine the validity or the likeliness of the validity of that information. Okay, for our last few minutes together, I just want to walk you through a couple of exercises just so that you can get your brain working about possible ways that you can start digging into some death records. So let's hop on over to the website. If you're new here, you might not know that one of my favorite resources on Ancestry.com is our card catalog. The card catalog lists all of the databases available on Ancestry.com. And because I tend to do what I call cluster research, or I research groups of families at a time rather than getting stuck or hung up on a person and frustrating myself because I can't always find exactly what I'm looking for, I'll research family groups. So I'm interested, for the purposes of this exercise, what death records Ancestry.com has for the state of North Carolina. So I'm just going to filter down to death records, and then I'm going to filter down to the US, come down here to North Carolina, and you're going to see that Ancestry.com has 224 databases that contain records of deaths of some that are somehow connected to the state of North Carolina. Now, I could sort these alphabetically, but the two databases that I want to point out are right here at the top. The first one is this North Carolina Birth and Death Indexes. You'll notice this database covers a couple hundred years, but that it is just an index. So all you're going to get is some basic information. Now, we got this index from the state archives. You find that down here in the source information. It was originally on microfilm there. We got a copy of that microfilm, and then we're able to digitize that. So because there are actual digital images, I could come in here and browse directly to it or search, and what you're going to see is, like I said, just the index. So it's not going to have all of that rich information that would be available on a death certificate. Okay, so if there are original certificates available, that's what you're going to want to look at. If they're available online, great. If they're not, use that index to get enough information to be able to write the State Vital Records Office to get a copy of that original death certificate. Now, in this case, we happen to have North Carolina death certificates from 1909 through 1975 online here and available. Now, how do I know who I'm looking for? Here's just a little trick that I'm going to throw here at the end of the presentation about one of the ways that I do research. So I'm going to bring up my Family Tree Maker file. You'll notice over here in the index panel I have a filter button. So I'm going to filter in to my list here that I'm creating anybody who has North Carolina listed as a place for any event that occurred in their life. I just want to see how many people in my family tree are affiliated in any way with the state of North Carolina. It's going to take it just a second there, and now we're going to see I have 1,644 people who have some event in their life that occurred in the state of North Carolina. Now, remember, I'm looking at a database here for death certificates from 1909 through 1975. So I'm going to filter out anybody who died before 1909 because I'm not going to find a death certificate for them in this database. I'm also going to filter out anybody who died after 1975. We're going to get rid of them. Now, I'm down to 1,068. For me, that's still a little bit too cumbersome. Also, I happen to know that there's a lot of people in here who were born recently, and I'm not going to go looking for death certificates for them. So if they were born after 1975, I'm going to exclude them as well. And see, I'm just whittling this list down until I get a workable list of people. And when I get to a list that I feel is usable, then I can just start working my way through. Now you'll notice it's filtered this list down now to these 989 people. And you'll notice that I do not have death information for this person, Artie Jane Alexander. She was born in 1854. I know who she was married to, but it looks like they may have moved to South Carolina, so I may not find a record for her. I have this Anna H. Allen. I only have a birth year and death year for her, not dates specifically. Probably because I originally received this information off of her tombstone, and that's all it listed was a year for her birth and her death. So let's look at Anna here. Anna was married to a Shipman, and so I'm going to come over here and I'm going to look for an Anna Shipman who was born in 1851 and died in 1943. That's all I'm going to put in here. And click search, and you'll notice here is an Anna O.H. Her middle initial was H. I knew that, but I didn't know what it stood for. Here's an Anna H. Shipman, so I'm going to go ahead and click on that. Now this is the index. This is the stuff that we indexed off this record. You can look at that, and that's great, but always click through to the original image if it exists. You never know if the information has been indexed accurately. Certainly not all of the information on the index or the image has been indexed, so you always want to look at that original image. So I'm going to zoom in here just a little bit so we can see this a little better. Here is Anna, and now she has a middle name, Hazeltine, so I can add that. She is widowed. She's the widow of Thomas Jefferson Shipman, so I could just double check over here. Yep, her husband died in 1943. I already knew that he predeceased her. Here is her usual residence. She has lived in this community where she died for 30 years, so again, that's a big clue. She died at the same address that she lives at, so she died at home. I can scroll down here and I can see information about the cause of death, how long she had been ill. Scroll down a little bit more over here. I see her exact birth date, August 28th, 1851, so I can add that. She was born in Henderson County, so I can add that. Now here it lists her parents, Joel R. Allen, born in Henderson County, and Christine Gray, born in Rutherford County. Well, I had her father's name as Joel Allen, but I did not know where he was born. I have her mother's name, however, as Christina Morris. Now, this certificate here lists her mother's maiden name as Gray. So that's something I'm going to want to pay attention to. Where did this name Morris come from? Maybe I check her sister's death certificate and see if it lists the same name. Maybe I go searching for a marriage record for this couple. Was Christina married before? Could Gray be her maiden name and Morris be the name she had when she married Joel? All of these are just clues or flags or little breadcrumbs that lead me closer and closer to the truth. And I'm going to want to make note of all of this information so that I know what I'm looking for when I go looking for other records. Looks like here she's buried, she was buried in the Ebenezer Cemetery in Henderson County, and Thomas Shepard's funeral home took care of the arrangements. And then here is that other little piece of critical information, which is that the informant was a J.E. Shipman of Hendersonville, North Carolina. Now, I don't know if J.E. is male or female, but what I would do is come over here to her list of children and see if she has one with the initials J.E. In this case, she does. She has a son named James with a middle initial of E. So I would probably double check that he was, in fact, living there in 1943 when she passed away. So that's just a quick tutorial, hopefully, not just of what's included or involved in a death certificate, but also of how I use some of these records, how I get to what it is that I'm looking for, and then how I pay attention to every little detail to make sure that it either matches or corroborates what it is that I already know about the family, or I put in that information as new information and then continue to look for additional clues to prove that the information here is accurate. Her son gave this information to the person who recorded the death certificate. Did he know his grandparents? Why is his grandmother's maiden name inaccurate? Could he have, in his distress over the death of his mother, could he have provided inaccurate information? Could he have answered that question just incorrectly because he was distraught, or did he really not know, or is it really true? All of those questions I start asking and then go looking for the answers. Well, that's all I have available for you today. Hopefully, you'll join us again on Thursday. I believe Anne will be doing the broadcast on Thursday morning, again, following along with this theme of death records. She'll be talking about cemeteries and tombstones, so I hope you'll join her then. We're also putting together our calendar for our November broadcast, so if you have any suggestions, please feel free to email us at ask@ancestry.com about topics that you would like to see addressed in future broadcasts. Until next time, this is Crista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.